Hey everybody, welcome back to our series, group series, Detour, and we are here with our group once again, getting the opportunity to share with you some of our thoughts and kind of what God has been teaching us through this series. And I know that you've been learning a lot, and I hope that you've been encouraged by the series so far. And today we're going to be talking in general about the sin of comparison and how that can be a really major detour in your life. As a matter of fact, it can basically derail your whole life because you begin to either see yourself too highly or begin to kind of tear yourself down too low. And I'm going to show you how this happens in the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. There's this passage of scripture found in Numbers chapter 13 after they know that God has given them the land. And here's what it says. And they told them, he sends out the spies, Moses sends out the spies to check out the land. And basically, they weren't supposed to figure out if they could take the land. They were supposed to figure out how they were going to take the land. God had already given them the land. And that happens to us a lot of times. We kind of go out and say, God, you tell us your will, and then we're going to decide whether or not we do it. That's not the way to live. But they come back, the spies come back. He sends out 12 of them, Moses does, and they come back and they tell him, we came to the land that you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell there on the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Those are giants. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. And then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against them, for they are stronger than we are. And it continues and says, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Well, they weren't grasshoppers in God's eyes, and it didn't matter what other people thought, but they began to compare themselves to other people that were quote unquote better than them. And because they did that, they missed what God had for them. And then they began to grumble. They begin to complain because basically there is a punishment and the people recognize that they're going to spend a lot of time in the wilderness, not just a few months or a couple of years, but now it's going to be 40 years. And so they decide they're going to take matters into their own hands, and instead of going through the Jordan and the way that God had told them to go, they decided they'd go up through the south. Apparently there's some very small cave dwellers in that area, and here's what happens. When Moses told these words to the people of Israel, in other words, that they weren't going to get to go in for a long time, they mourned greatly. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the heights of the hill country, saying, here we are. We will go up to the place that the Lord has promised, for we have sinned. But Moses said, why are you now trespassing against the command of the Lord, when that will not succeed? Do not go up, for the Lord is not among you. If you do, you will be struck down before your enemies. But they presumed to go up to the heights of the hill country, although neither the ark of the covenant nor the Lord nor Moses departed out of the camp. The Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in the hill country, these are cave dwellers, came out and defeated them and pursued them even to Hormah. So at this point, they do the exact opposite. As opposed to being paralyzed by comparison, now the sin of comparison actually puffs them up, and they believe that they can do something on their own without God's help. And oftentimes we just see with our physical eyes instead of seeing with our spiritual eyes. And I suspect that's happened in a lot of our lives as well, probably a lot of yours. So maybe you could kind of begin sharing, and of course, they're in your groups, you can share as well. Share a time in your life in which you allowed comparison to tear you down and to keep you from seizing God's best.
A little over a year ago, I became a full-time mom to 4 kids, and while I'm really enjoying that, they still thankfully have contact with their birth mom, and so I find myself every other weekend, like clockwork, on Sunday when they come home being like, what'd you do this weekend?
Wow.
What did you eat for dinner? Did you take a bath? Did you brush your teeth? And really questioning, am I doing as much as she's doing? Am I doing, should I be doing more? And then the sin comes in for me when I'm like, well, now I know what she's doing because they've told me, so now I need to do even more than that so I can be the better mom. And so I find myself a lot of times going, these 4 children were given to me for this season and in this time, and if I just do what I'm supposed to do when I have them, then I'm going to be doing the right thing.
Lacey, that is a great example, and I guarantee you there's some people that are watching that can really identify with that. That's a very natural response, but it's a flesh response, isn't it? Yeah.
So I'm the single guy on staff, and we don't have to talk about how old I am, but I am single and ready to mingle. Camera focus really close right here. But throughout all my 20s, whenever I would, there would be a person that I really admire, I would immediately go to their Wikipedia page to see how old they were when they got married. And then that would be like oh, well, they got married they didn't meet their fiance until they were 22, and they got married at 24. And then 24 came, and then it was like, oh, I'm on this clock. And I'm not saying that I still do it, but George Clooney was really old when he got married. But what it did was it put this time clock on me. And so I just was in a lot of really bad relationships.
Yeah.
So, and that wasn't great for me, because I felt like, man, I'm just letting someone else set the standard for me about when things are supposed to happen for me. And that was a lot of pressure, and it led to a lot of terrible things.
Yeah.
So
I'll go ahead. I feel like I'm still kind of living ours and didn't even realize it until recently. And Kyle and I've had some conversations about this. Two of my best friends growing up became police officers, and that's what I longed for the longest time. And I see them with their wives being able to stay at home and comparing our lives to where I hadn't. That dream didn't come true for me. And, I got that dream about a year ago, and Kai and I've talked about this a lot. Like, is this what God truly wanted for me and for us, or was it me falling into that comparison of what others have and what I longed for personally for so long? And now, I don't know. Kyle and I have talked about this a lot the last couple of weeks of, is this truly what God wants for us? Is it truly the road that we're supposed to be going down? Is it the detour that we were supposed to take? Or had God, we talked earlier about God setting the fast track for us, where we already on our fast track, and we stepped outside of it. And Rocky said earlier about, when you're outside God's will, and Paul McDill told me that whenever I told them that I was getting ready to leave. He's like, I don't always know when I'm in God's will, but I know exactly when I'm outside of it.
Wow.
And it's tough. It's a tough road to navigate, and we're still in it. So
yeah, for us, blended family, kind of like having, you have 4 kids. We married, coming together, just dating, and then marrying as a blended family. You try to compare yourself. Or, when the kids go to their dad's house, it's all fun times. When they come to our house, it's, serious time. It's, it's kind of like that, because it's kind of weekend time versus this. So we try to think we have to compare ourselves to be the fun time all the time, but, you can't do that. In reality, you got to be structured. You got to, but it was hard as a blended family, because having her or me try to treat her kids like I treat mine, and it was a learning curve for us, and we got it down really well now. But trust me, it was a battle. It was a battle.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, after I graduated high school, I kind of spent 4 years in the wilderness or the military. You can take your pick. But when I came out of the military, God really got a hold of me and finally sat me down and got me to go into ministry, which he had been calling me for several years before that. I just wasn't willing to admit that. But after spending 4 or 5 years in the military, I was much older than most of the guys that were starting out in student ministry. And I found myself a lot, and Amy can validate this, just comparing myself to where they are. Like, they're 21 and I'm 25, and I just feel like I'm way behind that power curve. And I think personally it hurt me a lot in ministry because I was too busy focusing on what the younger guys were doing instead of what God had called me to do and how God had called me to lead. And even comparing just our skill sets and what they were good at and what I was good at, and feeling like I'm not good at what I need to be good at, instead of realizing, no, God gave me exactly what I need to do exactly what he's called me to do.
Who else has seen it?
I have one. So I have struggled with crippling insecurity my entire life. And a lot of people that know me have no idea because I try to come off, as confident as I can. But, and God blessed me with a sister that is 3 years younger, but is just good at everything. And I mean everything. All the sports that I failed at, she succeeded. And my parents were both athletics. So to have, their second daughter be not only the top 5% of her class and good at every single sport and just kind of this, shining star. Then there's me, who went to school, got pregnant, didn't get accepted into grad school. Then my sister comes in 5 years after, gets straight into grad school for the thing that I went to school for, and is now graduated with her master's in it. It's so hard not to get caught in this trap of comparison. And I've realized over the last 2 years that it's caused a lot of resentments in my heart, like bitterness and resentment that I didn't even know was there. And so that's a really hard thing when it's your sister, your flesh and blood, someone you love and someone you're proud of, but also someone that you're constantly comparing yourself to. Am I, like, what standard am I measuring myself with? The standard that my younger sister has accomplished. And so that's something that I have to pray about daily. That is something that I take to God daily, because I can find myself in this sinful, resentment-filled battle. So
I would say the most recent one for me has been ever since I had kids, ever since I had my first child. And it, honestly isn't as similar as that. It's not as similar as, like, are my kids having as much fun, even though my son tells me sometimes, I wish you were like Aunt Leslie, or whatever. It's like, that's fine. Whatever. You want to go? Go
to her. Spend the night with Aunt Leslie.
That's fine. I'm okay with that. But for me, it's been, Joe's schedule is so unique. He's 24 on, 48 off as a fireman. And so when he goes to work, even though it's at 4:30 in the morning, which that stinks, he doesn't have to worry about the kids. He doesn't have to, like, fight them every morning, giving them breakfast, or schedule childcare for when I just need to work, like, not even have fun. It's like, well, work's fun. But, so I find myself comparing myself to Joe, for something that he's not even doing to me. It's just our life. It's just our schedule. And so, what I do is I focus on the problem, and something that isn't even a problem, it's just a problem in my mind. I find myself focusing on that instead of what I know to be true and what I know is right. And, that I'm so glad that he can take one shift off and we have 5 days together, or, that I have the flexibility to work from home if I have to, even though it's like with kids yelling and saying, Mama, hold you. And, so I think it's so easy for me to get discouraged and get frustrated with Joe, or get frustrated with our circumstance, or just want to, like, throw in the towel, when I focus on what I think is the issue instead of just what is true and good.
And so all of these things lead us to, or cause us to fail to seize what it is that God has for us. And that's really the crazy thing, because we're so focused on what other people are kind of putting out there, that we actually never say, well, this is what God has for me. I tell my kids every night, you're talented enough and gifted enough to be everything God wants you to be. And I told my son yesterday, who was really upset about his football camp. He was saying he was upset because basically he wasn't the best. He was with all the older kids. And I said, well, it's not a competition. You've got to be the best. You've got to be the best Ben you can be. I mean, you can't be the best Nelson. You can't be the best 8th grader. And that's not what you're supposed to be. That's not how God created you. And so we want our kids to know that. And I think that's important. But so the other side of the coin, a time in which you basically have compared yourself to someone else and then allowed it to puff you up and felt like you were better than them, or you deserved the job that they got, or maybe even, or whatever.
Whenever we were at Claiborne, Sea Life was at Claiborne, I had met David and started going to Claiborne and for church, and then I was one of the people that was asked to go to Miami to work in the building boom. I thought I was like, they only asked 2 of us. I was like, man, I'm top dog, that's pretty cool, I get to go down there. But what I didn't realize is there's so much sin down there, so much stuff to take you away, and it took me away from Christ. It took me away from the church. It took me away. But at the time, I was like, this is cool. I'm going down there. I didn't realize that it led me away from the Lord and not where I needed to be.
I think the trap for me in comparison and trying to make myself feel better is I find the thing that I'm the very best at, and I compare with you on something you're really weak at. You know what I'm saying? I find that area that I know I can beat you at in this area.
Like David specifically?
Well, maybe.
Easy target. You set the bar low.
But just to be able to find areas that I want to compare, because I know I can win in those areas, instead of an honest evaluation of who I am and what God's equipped me to do, finding the areas that you're weak in so I can feel better.
Yeah, I've suffered with that sin often, and in a position working for a guy right now that I have always felt like can do the job better.
Yeah.
You know, and I kept thinking just negatively about him.
Yeah.
Say, oh, you're wrong. You're doing that wrong. You shouldn't treat people that way. I can do better. And I kept praying about it, and God said, pray for him.
Mm.
And so I daily, on my drive to work, I'm praying for him to find Christ, and for you can't hate somebody you're praying for, you know, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's, you know, I've got to love him.
Mm-hmm.
And until I can love him, I can't, you know, get better at me. And then God won't open that door until I've weathered this and I've grown through it.
Paul McDill and I used to meet before we were on staff together. We were both, you know, associate pastors at churches. And one day his pastor came in and we were eating at, I believe it was Johnny Carino's. We were eating at, and his pastor came in and he said, well, I'm sure you guys are solving all the problems that we cause. And he made this joke, and I thought about it. I thought it was funny. But, you know, he was exactly right. We really did think that if they would just listen to us, all of the church's problems would go away. And just so you know, we were wrong. As proof. Proof, see life.
Now some of us say the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. Now some of y'all are saying the exact same thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I met Jesus. He came into my life when I was a junior in high school. And I was a really good kid up until that point. And so I was a really good rule follower. I've always been a rule follower. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. And so I just became really judgmental. I was comparing myself to all my friends. And, you know, on a Monday morning in athletics, one of my friends would come in, or just whoever. It would be different people at different times. And they would just kind of have that look like, I failed again. And I'm like, just don't do it. You know what you struggle with. Just don't do it. It's that easy, you know, because I didn't struggle with the same things. But the reality was I had never been faced with those same temptations. And it wasn't until my junior year in college that I feel like God revealed sin to me. He revealed my own sin. And from my senior year in high school till that point, I just would compare myself to someone, and I just kept getting worse and worse. And it was like, well, at least I'm not, you know, drinking, you know, every weekend. Well, it's like, at least I'm not drinking every night, and it's at least I'm not getting drunk every night, and at least I'm not doing that. And it's like, well, at least I'm not doing that, you know. And it just comparing myself, you can always find someone worse in a worse place than you. And so that comparison trap, it just kept allowing me to go into other things. But the verse that God showed me my junior in college was that pride comes before the fall. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that's why I was so arrogant in myself and my own ability to withstand sin and giving in to temptation, that it was, you know, it just reminds me of the Egyptians and the plagues. And it just reminds me of the frogs, and they wanted frogs. It was like they idolized them, and then they had them everywhere, and they didn't want them anymore. And that's what I feel like happened to me. It was like God gave me all the sin I thought I wanted and could handle, and then until I was just done with it, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, I want to kind of conclude with this because I think this thought is really interesting. In Joshua chapter 2, 40 years later, the spies, now they're sending spies in. They're about to enter into the promised land for real this time. And they meet this woman named Rahab, and she says this to them. It says, before the men lay down, we were scared. Our hearts melted, and there was not a man left in the land. And she's talking about when they crossed the Red Sea. She's talking about way back then. In other words, the prize was right in front of them. They were ready to basically capitulate to the children of Israel. There's an old saying that is, if God says it, I believe it. We don't merely trust our physical eyes, we trust our spiritual eyes, and those spiritual eyes of faith are even more important. So don't compare yourself to anyone or to anyone else or to their calling. Merely trust God to fulfill His purposes and His plan for your life. The Bible says, He who called you is faithful, and He will equip you because He will do it. So if you're watching this video, maybe you can find some time to discuss places where you have been paralyzed by comparison or pride or fear, and to recognize that God has put this promised land in front of you, this land of blessing that's in front of you. And so sometimes when we receive a detour and God leads us a different way, we need to be confident that we can seize what it is that He has for us. Don't look to the right, don't look to the left at anybody else. It'll either tear you down or puff you up, but instead, keep your eyes focused on Jesus Christ and the calling that He has for you. God bless you. You guys have a fantastic discussion time, and we will talk to you next week.